There are people whose very stillness can make the world grow quiet. In his 80s, Sam Elliott walked slowly into the backstage area of the tribute ceremony, as if every step he took carried a fragment of American cinema's memory. The warm lights fell upon his silver mustache and chiseled face, a face that time seemed not to fade but to deepen. He gently adjusted his collar, said nothing, yet the entire room suddenly grew so silent that people could hear their own breathing. Hollywood has grown accustomed to noise, to declarations, to men running toward the spotlight. But Sam Elliott is different. He is the kind of man who makes the light come looking for him. In that moment, between the clicks of cameras rising and fading, among rows of young faces watching him with barely concealed reverence, Sam stood alone, quiet as a tree that has survived 100 storms. Not because he wished to appear mysterious, but because for Sam, silence has never been a style. It is a memory, an instinct, a legacy. His voice, so deep it seems to vibrate through a room whenever he speaks, has captivated audiences for more than 6 decades. But what truly keeps eyes on him is that silence. The silence of a man who spent a lifetime learning how to stand firm without needing applause. People still call Sam Elliott the last icon of the West. But to understand that, we must step back from today's lights and see the young Sam once standing at the crossroads of 18, carrying a dream that even the father he admired most did not believe in. That ache, the shadow of the words, "You'll never make anything out of that voice," followed him all his life, becoming the very material of his performances. Men who speak little, carry sorrow, and live with the sense that they are racing against something no one else can see. Tonight, as Sam Elliott stands in the wings preparing to walk on stage to receive his Lifetime Achievement Award, his eyes are not fixed on the audience. They look inward, as though he were speaking to a man who left him decades ago, the father he never got the chance to prove right. And perhaps that is what makes Sam's journey so extraordinary. Not the fame, not the legendary cowboy roles, but the way he spent an entire life turning what was once seen as a flaw into a signature, turning silence into an emblem, and turning a wound into a kind of light Hollywood could never manufacture. Only time could. Sam Elliott's story does not begin with a brilliant day on a film set. It begins with a young man standing in an Oregon valley, looking out toward the distant hills, believing that even if no one believed in him, as long as he kept standing, then someday, destiny would find him. And eventually, it truly did. There are lives shaped not by what people achieve, but by what they never managed to say. For Sam Elliott, that began in his own childhood, a childhood wrapped in the silence of the Pacific Northwest, where the wind pushed through long lines of pine trees, carrying with it a coldness that did not come from the weather, but from the distances within a family that looked peaceful on the surface. Sam was born in 1944 in Sacramento, California, but his true childhood began when his family moved to the outskirts of Portland, Oregon. It was a place where the sky was so gray, people forgot what sunlight felt like, where dirt roads ran deep into the woods, and where afternoons sank into the scent of damp pine. For a child, such a setting was both sad and beautiful. Sad for its loneliness, but beautiful because it taught him how to hear the things no one said aloud. His father, Henry Nelson Elliott, was a man born into a time when survival mattered more than dreaming. He worked for the Department of the Interior a stable job that demanded discipline and a level of practicality that bordered on harshness. In Henry's eyes, life split neatly into two parts. The part one could rely on, and the part one should stay far away from. Hollywood, the arts, anything linked to the stage, to him, all belonged to the second part. In Sam's memory, his father was not the type to shout or lose his temper. He was quiet, but every word that came out of his mouth carried enough weight to silence the room for an entire day. And Sam, with his sensitive nature and inward depth, felt that weight more sharply than anyone else. Family meals often passed with the sound of utensils tapping plates more than conversation. Sam sat there, listening to the wind outside the window, sometimes wondering if there would ever be a day his father asked about what he dreamed of becoming. That day never came. When Sam was around 16, a desire to act began to form. He watched old Western films on the black and white television, saw men on horseback riding across valleys, and something inside him stirred. Not because of the lights, not because of fame, but because he recognized something familiar in their loneliness. Sam thought, "I understand them." But when he told his father that, he received only a cold stare and the sentence he would never forget. "You'll never make a living with that voice." Those words were not merely disapproval, they were judgment. They stripped Sam of the feeling that he had the right to dream. His voice, the very thing that would later become his signature, was seen by his father as a weakness. No one knows how Sam reacted in that moment, because he said nothing. He simply went quiet, as though a part of his youth had just closed forever. From that point on, the conflict between father and son never erupted loudly. It existed in silence, a silence far more painful than any raised voice. Sam spoke less, withdrew more, and spent long hours wandering alone down the dirt paths leading into the forest behind their house. He did not abandon his dream, but he learned to hide it like a forbidden secret. His mother, Glyn Mamie, understood him better than anyone. She told him many times not to take his father's words too seriously, that men of that era were often afraid of things they didn't understand. But for a young man learning to believe in himself, a father's words carried far more weight. Sam grew up feeling not good enough, not worthy of trust, a feeling that followed him well into his 70s. Then, in 1962, the greatest tragedy of his youth arrived. Henry Elliott died suddenly when Sam had just turned 18. The departure came without warning, without last words, without a chance to repair anything. Sam stood beside his father's casket, the Oregon wind slipping into his thin coat, and for the first time he understood what something truly irreversible meant. He no longer had the chance to prove anything to the man he had spent his childhood fearing, loving, and wanting to be accepted by. Some said Sam cried. Some said he stood still like a stone. No one knows the truth, but many years later, in a rare interview, Sam said only one sentence: "I wish he had lived long enough to hear my voice." That regret was not just a memory. It became the compass of his life. The reason Sam Elliott was always careful, serious, and honest, to a degree that sometimes made him seem difficult in Hollywood's eyes. He didn't want to do anything halfway. He didn't want to fail. He didn't want to become exactly what his father once feared he would be. But the more painful truth was, Sam never blamed his father. He blamed himself for not having the courage to say what he had held inside. blamed himself for not showing his father the man he would become, blamed the cruelty of life that gives us a dream, then takes away the one person we want to prove it to. In the end, it was the space between Sam and his father that built the soul of who he became. Because without that silence, the world might never have had the Sam Elliott we know. The man who carries in every role the sorrow of things left unsaid and the strength of someone who survived loneliness far too early. His childhood did not close with laughter, but with a sentence he never had the chance to speak. And from that unspoken sentence, Sam Elliott's true journey began. When Sam Elliott left Oregon for Los Angeles in the early 1960s, he didn't bring much with him besides a few sets of clothes, a bit of saved money, and a fragile belief he wasn't even sure he had the strength to hold on to. The city was so vast that every dream felt small, so loud that every word of encouragement got swallowed whole, and so cold that a boy who had just lost his father had to learn how to bury his pain deep inside. Los Angeles was not the West Sam had imagined. It had no hills, no silence, no open space to breathe. But it had the one thing he came looking for: opportunity. Even if, at that time, that opportunity was thinner than a casting sheet. From 1963 to 1965, Sam took every job he could find: kitchen helper, warehouse loader, stage platform mover, wall painter, gym cleaner. Mornings he worked. Afternoons he stood in long lines outside studio gates. And evenings he attended acting classes held in makeshift rooms where dozens of people squeezed together just for the chance to read 3 lines. Each time he read, Sam tried lowering his voice as deep as possible, believing that warm resonance would make people notice. But life does not operate the way he imagined. Hollywood back then loved bright faces, youthful energy, fast talkers, big smiles. Sam was the opposite. Tall, thin, a face carved like stone, eyes older than his age, and a voice so deep it made listeners feel as though he carried an entire winter in his chest. Studios looked at him and didn't know where to place him. Some directors said he was old before his time. Others said he was too Western, too specific, not the type of leading man in style. In countless casting rooms, Sam would walk in, read a few lines, and see people exchange quick glances. Glances that spoke more clearly than any verbal rejection. Not this one. Some nights he returned to his tiny rented room, so small he had to lie on his side to stretch his legs, staring at the peeling ceiling paint and thinking about his father's words. "You'll never make a living with that voice." Now, in a city that didn't know his name, that sentence echoed like a prophecy of a future Sam was afraid to admit. In 1969, he landed his first role in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. It wasn't a big role. No one remembers the character's name. No one noticed Sam standing in a corner of the frame, appearing for a few seconds before disappearing. But for Sam, it was the first time he touched a real film set, stood under the lights, heard the camera rolling, and felt that even if he was just a faint shadow, he was standing exactly where he belonged. But Hollywood doesn't care about shadows. It only cares about who can sell tickets. In the early 1970s, Sam Elliott lived between 2 realities. By day, he played supporting roles so small, they didn't even earn a credit. By night, he faced the fear of being forgotten, a fear greater than poverty. Many casting directors wrote on his file, "Too regional, too slow, not bankable. Too Western, too slow, not profitable." Those words weren't just professional evaluations. For Sam, they echoed the sentence he had carried since 17. Not good enough. And strangely, it was those years of rejection that sharpened the resilience no role could ever fully portray. He learned to accept the silence after every audition. He learned to rise after every criticism. He learned to live with the feeling that he was out of fashion, not fitting the mold studios wanted. Sam understood that if he wanted to survive, he had to be patient enough for others to quit before he did. Once, when a director asked why he continued despite so many rejections, Sam simply replied, "Because I don't know how to want anything else." It was not the answer of a man with grand ambition. It was the answer of someone who had placed his entire self into one single path. A path he could not turn away from, because turning back meant admitting his father was right. And then, as with every story about those who refused to give up, fate finally arrived, but not with a dramatic explosion. It came as a small, quiet opportunity on the fringes of Hollywood, the 1976 film Lifeguard, a role many others refused because it had no future. Yet it became the first moment the world saw Sam Elliott not as a background actor, but as a soul that belonged to the screen itself. But before that light appeared, Sam had to walk through 12 long years of darkness. 12 years to learn that the deep voice once seen as a flaw would one day become a legacy. 12 years to realize that silence is not failure, but the strength of someone who knows how to wait for the right moment. And 12 years to understand that sometimes the only path left is the one meant for you. The years 1963-1975 did not give Sam glamour. They gave him something far more important: character. And that character became the foundation of everything he would eventually achieve. When Sam Elliott walked onto the set of Lifeguard in 1976, he was nearly 32 years old, an age Hollywood no longer calls a promising young actor, but a man still holding on to hope. 12 years of struggling to survive in the industry had taught him not to expect miracles. But sometimes, what one does not expect arrives at exactly the right time. Lifeguard was not predicted to be a major film. It had no massive budget, no high-profile director, no dazzling stars. But it had one thing Sam had never truly been given before: the chance to stand at the center of the frame, to have the camera look directly at him and not turn away. On set, when he stepped onto the beach with that open shirt, long hair, and a posture both strong and melancholy, people suddenly realized what Hollywood had overlooked for years. Sam Elliott didn't need to try to become a character. He was the character. His performance was not loud, not flashy. Lifeguard told the story of a man trapped between duty and desire, between the old and the new, between honesty and choice. It was also Sam's own story. When the film premiered, audiences couldn't take their eyes off the tall man standing alone before the ocean, carrying the look of someone who had lived more than life allowed him to say. Sam didn't act. He lived. But in a paradox only Hollywood could create, that breakthrough performance ended up placing him inside a box the industry suddenly found irresistible. The modern Western man. Quiet, firm, stoic, with eyes that revealed everything he never spoke aloud. From then on, Sam was constantly cast in Western films and series, but as supporting characters, men who appeared for a few minutes and disappeared like riders at the end of a dusty road. Sam was grateful for the work, but deep inside, a question began to whisper. Will I only ever get to play one kind of man? The 1980s were a quiet but crucial period. Sam worked a lot. The Sackets, 1979. Murder in Texas, 1981. The Yellow Rose, 1983. These projects didn't turn him into a star, but they made him a face American audiences felt familiar with. The kind of actor people recognized before they remembered his name. For Sam, that was both comforting and burdensome. Even though he appeared frequently on screen, he still hadn't been given a role worthy of the depth he knew he carried. But something far more important was happening beneath the surface. His style was maturing, quieter, sharper. Sam didn't try to please Hollywood. He let time do its work. He believed that things built on truth could not remain forgotten forever. Then, in 1993, fate appeared again with Tombstone, one of the defining Western films of its era. When the director first met Sam in the audition room, he didn't ask him to read lines. He simply looked at Sam for a few seconds and said, "I don't need you to act. I just need you to stand there." It was the greatest compliment Sam had ever received. In Tombstone, Sam played Virgil Earp, the calm but steadfast older brother of Wyatt Earp, Kurt Russell. The role was not the central character, but it was the moral backbone of the entire film. When Sam stepped out in dark cowboy attire, with deep eyes and a voice like hot desert sand, audiences immediately sensed this was not a performance. This was the kind of man who must have truly existed in the Old West. Tombstone was a major success. It transformed Sam Elliott from that familiar face into a modern Western icon. But more than commercial success, the film did something far more meaningful. It allowed Sam to be himself. No forcing, no bending to trends. No need to prove anything. Sam was Sam. And for the first time, Hollywood saw it. Yet behind the glow of success, invisible lines troubled him. Late-blooming success is a double-edged sword. At nearly 50, Sam knew time wasn't generous. He was no longer young enough to experiment, no longer new enough to be discovered. Hollywood loves things that rise fast and burn fast. Sam was like a slow, steady flame, resilient, beautiful, but not everyone has the patience to see it. He once said, "I was grateful, but I was afraid too. Afraid that this was it, the highest place I'd ever reach." It was not the fear of ambition. It was the fear of a man who had spent half a lifetime waiting to be seen, then worried that gaze might vanish once more. But what Sam didn't know was that those quiet years had already built an irreversible truth. Sam Elliott, whether he wanted it or not, had become the final face of America's cowboy spirit. The strong, honest, sorrow-tinged beauty of men who speak only when necessary and go silent when they're hurting. The years from 1976 to 1993 were not a loud breakthrough. They were the journey of a man walking from shadow to light, step by step, through persistence and self-respect. Qualities Hollywood cannot manufacture, but only time can certify. And it was from here that Sam Elliott entered the most challenging phase of all. When his career began to rise, but his heart had to confront the valleys no spotlight could ever reach. The success of Tombstone in 1993 was like a strong wind pushing Sam Elliott into the light after nearly 3 decades standing at the edge of the screen. But the light, as always, never comes alone. It drags with it long shadows, the hidden corners inside a man who has grown used to being strong in silence. From 1994 to the early 2000s were years when Sam worked without pause. He appeared in a string of projects: The Big Lebowski, 1998, We Were Soldiers, 2002, Hulk, 2003, Thank You for Smoking, 2005. On screen, he remained the quiet, steady, composed Western man. But behind the camera, Sam faced what he once thought he had already overcome: the feeling of not belonging anywhere. Late success made him cautious to the point of insecurity. He didn't dare believe Hollywood was truly opening its doors to him. And he didn't dare believe those doors would stay open. The more attention he received, the more afraid he became of losing the place he had just finally reached. This fear wasn't the fear of ambition, but the fear of someone who had been rejected far too many times, until trust felt as fragile as paper. In a rare interview, Sam once said, "Success doesn't erase the years when you felt invisible." It was the most painful truth of his life. After Tombstone, instead of feeling recognized, Sam fell into a period of doubting himself. He began to fear any role that wasn't good enough, afraid people would say, he was just lucky once. And the more afraid he became, the more he withdrew. The more he withdrew, the larger the distance grew between him and Hollywood. Hollywood loves brightness. Sam does not. Hollywood loves predictability. Sam is a man who carries so many seasons of silence inside him that no one can fully understand. And that very thing pushed him into a subtle but long-lasting crisis. A crisis of existence. In The Big Lebowski, 1998, Sam didn't appear much, but his few minutes on screen, with that deep voice and gentle sadness on his face, were enough to make him an icon of the film. People started saying, "Sam Elliott doesn't need dialogue. He just needs to stand there." It was a beautiful compliment, but for Sam, it was also an invisible trap. If all he needed to do was stand there, then what about the rest of him? His soul, his skill, his experience? Were they being left behind? He began asking himself the most painful question: do people truly need me, or just the image I carry? Being boxed into the cowboy archetype suffocated him more than ever. He didn't hate Westerns. On the contrary, it was his spiritual homeland. But he knew he had more than the sad eyes, more than the silver mustache, more than the deep voice. But Hollywood didn't see that. Or perhaps they didn't want to. On many nights after filming, Sam would sit alone on the balcony, sipping an old whiskey and staring into the dark sky. He didn't say it to anyone, not even Catherine Ross. But the fear of being left behind grew larger each day. The years of being criticized, refused, underestimated, returned like ghosts he thought he had buried long ago. Silence had always been his refuge, but now it had become the place where he was drowning. When We Were Soldiers, 2002 premiered, Sam was praised intensely. His role as the stern commander with a wounded soul proved that he wasn't just an image. He was an actor with real depth. But for Sam, that success opened yet another fear. The higher he climbed, the easier he could fall. The more he was noticed, the more vulnerable he felt to judgment. He was like a man walking a tightrope, each step an effort to balance between audience expectations and his own insecurities. Hollywood was changing quickly. The push toward younger faces left older actors, especially those not considered box office stars, drifting to the sidelines. Sam watched as new faces appeared everywhere, while his own opportunities to explore new types of characters grew fewer. What hurt him wasn't competition, but the fear of returning to the darkness he had lived in for so long. Some nights, looking back at his long journey, Sam quietly thought, "I've spent my whole life walking out of the darkness. I don't want to go back there ever again. But life does not only test a man's career, it tests his heart. Sam's long silence, his built-in hardness, and his fears that he never voiced often made him distant even from the people he loved most. Catherine Ross once said that in Sam there was a part no one could ever reach. Perhaps it was the part of the boy who had to protect himself from 16. Perhaps it was the part of the man who was never once validated by his father. And perhaps it was the part Sam himself didn't know how to open. Sam Elliott's crisis wasn't scandal, wasn't chaos, wasn't loss of control. It was a quiet war between fame and loneliness, between recognition and doubt, between the stage lights and the darkness inside. A war he had to walk through alone, silently, patiently, painfully. But sometimes, in the midst of crisis, a man finds the path back to himself. And that path would lead Sam Elliott into the most important chapter of his life. The chapter of love, of redemption, and of learning how to let someone truly step into his world. In the lives of men who are used to living in silence, love rarely arrives in brilliance. It comes in a very small, very gentle moment, yet enough to shake their entire inner world. For Sam Elliott, that moment happened in 1978 on the set of The Legacy in England, where he met Catherine Ross, a woman who had been through 4 marriages and carried in her eyes the weariness of someone who had loved much, lost much, and was wise enough not to believe in anything eternal. Sam, at that time, was an actor clinging to every small opportunity, with a heart locked tight and wounds unhealed from his relationship with his father. They did not meet through lightning-like attraction, nor through fervent declarations. They met through quiet, through a look that understood without needing words, through an invisible sympathy between 2 souls wounded in different moments of life. But that love was not easy. Catherine Ross was still in her 4th marriage, and Sam was a man who never wanted to intrude into anyone's life, much less hurt someone, especially a woman who carried a kind of peace so rare in the noisy world of Hollywood. They kept their distance, they held back, they avoided the feelings growing silently between them. But as with all things shaped by fate, that distance could delay, but not stop anything. When Ross officially divorced, Sam almost instantly knew that his life would turn onto another path. Not loud, but certain. In 1984, they married. No lavish ceremony, no media chase. Just 2 people, 2 hearts tired enough and mature enough to understand that the most precious thing was not vows, but the peace they brought to each other. In the early years of marriage, Sam's career was still unstable. He was not a major star, not the first choice for roles, sometimes not even on the list at all. But Ross saw what Hollywood had not yet seen: the sincerity, the steadiness, and the extraordinary patience of the man she had chosen. She didn't encourage him with flowery words. She stood beside him, quietly, so he had enough of a foundation to keep going. Once, Sam shared that he was offered a significant role that required him to fly out the very same day, but he refused, simply because he wanted to wait for Ross to finish her project. The famous director scolded him for being too emotional, but Sam replied softly, "I can't leave her behind. Not her." That was Sam's nature. A man who didn't say much, but when he chose someone, he chose with his whole life. Their love was not the kind of explosive romantic story the press loves. It was enduring, calm, slow, and rich in respect. Ross once said, "Sam is the kind of man who makes you feel safe even when he says nothing." Perhaps because he never saw love as possession. He saw it as something to be protected, with honesty, with presence, and with kindness. In the 1990s and 2000s, when Sam began receiving larger roles, Ross was the one who helped him balance the external light and the internal darkness. She reached the parts he hid, the fear of failure, the fear of not being enough, the fear of becoming the version Hollywood wanted rather than the one he truly was. She didn't heal everything, but she made sure he didn't face it alone. On many nights after filming, Sam would come home exhausted, sit at the kitchen table, watch Ross reading her book, and just like that, he felt calmer. No explanations needed, no comforting phrases. Her presence alone was enough to make the world feel gentle. By the time he turned 60, Sam Elliott looked back and realized he had passed through the hardest years of his life without becoming bitter. Because he did not walk through them alone. There are phases of life where, without a hand to hold, a gaze to return to, a home to shelter in, a person can become a very different version of themselves. Perhaps stronger, but perhaps colder. Ross kept him from becoming that. And then in 2018, when he received the first Academy Award nomination of his career for A Star Is Born, Sam didn't think of glory, didn't think of praise, didn't think of the world finally recognizing him. In the moment the camera turned toward him, he thought of Ross, the one who had walked with him when he was just a repeatedly rejected actor, the one who filled the empty spaces left by insecurity, the one who helped him believe that life still held things worth having without fighting for. Sam once said, "Everything good in my life came when she walked into it." Love does not change a person. It simply brings them back to the version they were meant to be. And Catherine Ross brought Sam Elliott back to himself, a man strong yet gentle, steadfast yet needing someone, silent yet no longer lonely. That was the redemption of his life. Not through song, not through fame, not through spotlight, but through a woman sitting beside him long enough, understanding enough, believing enough. By 2018, when Sam Elliott stepped onto the stage to receive his first Oscar nomination for A Star Is Born, he was 74 years old. People often say not everyone gets the chance to see the fruit of their life's work in the light. But Sam did, belatedly, gently, and in a way only those who spent years walking in darkness can truly understand. As the audience rose to applause, Sam didn't think about past failures, didn't think about the hopeless auditions of his youth, didn't think about the decades spent playing quiet, understated roles. He thought of the one thing that had haunted him for half his life. "I wish my father could hear this voice." That success opened a new chapter, one Sam believed he would walk through in the peace of old age, taking roles that fit, appearing at the right moments, needing no competition, no proving, no spotlight to still be respected. But life, as always, has a way of testing those who believe they have already endured everything. In 2022, during a podcast conversation, Sam Elliott spoke about the film The Power of the Dog, a critically acclaimed work and a strong Oscar contender. But Sam, with the blunt honesty of a Western man, said the film didn't feel like a Western, that it portrayed cowboys in a distorted way, and that he couldn't understand its spirit. Just a few sentences, but enough to ignite the biggest controversy of his career. In the eyes of the media, Sam instantly became the symbol of old thinking, of unprogressive men, of a generation past its time. They didn't listen to his full reasoning. They didn't understand the personal hurt of a man who had devoted his life to the Western genre, feeling wounded when he saw a version of it that clashed with what he believed was its authentic soul. They heard only what fit the story they wanted to tell. For Sam, the most painful part was not the criticism. It was being misunderstood. A week after the scandal erupted, Sam almost completely disappeared from the media. He and Ross retreated to their quiet Santa Barbara mountain home, where the sound of wind through the trees was louder than any vibrating phone. The man who had spent his entire life yearning to be seen now had to face his deepest fear, being seen in a way he could not explain. But then, on a public radio program, Sam came forward, sat before the microphone, an object he had always treated with the reverence of truth, and spoke in the deep voice that had traveled with him all his life. "I said things that hurt people, and I'm sorry for that. No excuses, no blame, no rebuttal. Just an old man standing up to face his own words, with all the honesty he had carried from childhood to the end of his life." What silenced the world was not the apology itself, but how he said it. Not trembling, not defensive, but not proud either. Just Sam Elliott, a man who always lived with dignity and never hid from himself. After the uproar, Sam appeared less often, not out of fear, but because he learned something youth never taught him: that sometimes silence is the way the world recalibrates its view of you. Hollywood changed quickly, but Sam did not. He didn't chase it, and he didn't fight it. He simply stood there with the same calm eyes, the same voice that seemed to touch bone, the same Western man who never needed noise to exist. Entering his 80s, Sam Elliott became a rare kind of figure, a living emblem, not because of awards, not because of lead roles or box office success, but because he embodied a spirit nearly extinct in Hollywood. The spirit of truth, simplicity, patience, and a kind of beauty that needs no polishing. In his later interviews, when asked what made him most proud, Sam never mentioned films, never mentioned the Oscars, never mentioned fame. He spoke only of endurance. "I stayed true, even when it was hard." It was the perfect summary of his legacy. More than 60 years in the profession, more than 70 film and television projects. A voice considered a cultural artifact of Hollywood, a face ranked among the last true Western icons of America, and above all, a character that never lost itself in a world capable of distorting people in just a few years. From 2019 to 2025, Sam Elliott no longer ran toward the lights. He walked only in enough brightness for those who loved him to still see him there. And as he grew older, people realized that what made Sam a legend was not the cowboy roles or the unforgettable lines he delivered, but his silence. The silence that knew how to speak, how to heal, how to stand firm through storms. One day, when new faces fill the screen and Hollywood continues to change, people will look back and see that Sam Elliott was never the loudest man, but he was the deepest. Not the most dazzling, but the most dependable. Not the brightest star, but the one who stayed the longest. And his legacy is not light. It is the quiet that has passed through countless seasons, yet never lost its strength. In his 80s, Sam Elliott lives more slowly in the house overlooking the California mountains, where the wind through the trees feels like a reminder that his life has come full circle. From a quiet boy in Oregon to a man all of Hollywood must bow its head to respect. No more glamour, no more rush, no more worries of youth. Only Sam, his old cowboy hat, and the peace he spent half a century trying to reach. In recent years, whenever the sunset falls, Sam often stands under the porch roof, looking into the distance as if speaking to someone who left him far too soon. The father who once doubted his voice, who never believed in his dreams, yet became the shadow that followed Sam his entire life. And now, in the stillness of old age, Sam no longer wishes to prove anything. He only wishes that, just once if it were possible, his father could hear the voice once seen as a flaw, now a symbol. Sam Elliott's legacy does not come from loud leading roles, nor from display or Hollywood shine. It comes from endurance, from the roles he turned into the soul of a film, even when he appeared far less than everyone else. It comes from that deep western wind of a voice, from the gentle and sorrowed eyes, from a sincerity so true that even a noisy world must grow quiet to listen. Sam does not need many words to make an impact. He only needs to be himself. In the late chapter of his life, he understands that a person's strength lies not in the light they stand under, but in the way they walk through the darkness. And Sam Elliott has walked through much darkness, with patience, kindness, and an honesty he never once lost. One day, Hollywood will change. New faces will come and go, but the image of Sam, the man sitting still on horseback, eyes looking into the distance, voice echoing like the heartbeat of the West, will remain. Not as a loud legend, but as a reminder that sometimes it is the quiet that makes a person great. If Sam Elliott's journey reminds you of those who live their lives with silence and truth, leave a small sign, a greeting, a memory, or even just a single dot, so we can preserve stories like this before they disappear in the noise of our era. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more cinematic journeys into the lives behind the fame. This is Hollywood Biographies, the light, the silence, the legacy.